Chosen one. One of the most confusing and painful experiences a person can go through is realizing that the place that is supposed to feel like home sometimes becomes the place where they feel the most alone. Family is supposed to represent safety, understanding, and unconditional belonging. Yet, for some people, the emotional reality feels very different. You may sit at the same table, live under the same roof, and share the same history, but deep inside, there is a quiet distance that is difficult to explain. You are present physically, but emotionally, you feel like you are standing on the outside of something that everyone else seems to understand without effort. Conversations move around you, decisions are made around you, and opinions are expressed as if your perspective either does not exist or does not matter. Over time, you begin noticing a pattern that becomes harder to ignore. When you speak honestly about something uncomfortable, the reaction is rarely curiosity.
Instead, it often turns into dismissal, defensiveness, or even blame. If you point out a behavior that hurts people, you are labeled as negative. If you try to set a boundary to protect your peace, you are told you are being dramatic or disrespectful. If you simply express a different way of thinking, it can feel as though the entire emotional atmosphere shifts against you. Slowly, you begin to understand that inside this system, you have become the different one. The person who somehow does not move in the same rhythm as the rest of the household. At first, many people try to fix this feeling by changing themselves. They attempt to speak less, question less, and adapt more. They convince themselves that if they just become easier to deal with, the connection will return. But the strange thing is that the more you silence your true perspective, the more disconnected you feel. Something inside you knows that pretending may create temporary peace, but it does not create real understanding. This is the moment where many chosen ones begin asking a painful question. Why does my own family feel like the place where I am least understood? The answer is rarely simple, and it is important to understand that family isolation does not automatically mean hatred or rejection in the obvious sense. In many cases, the people around you may still care about you in their own way. The deeper issue often lies in differences in awareness, emotional maturity, and values that develop as people grow in different directions. Families operate like systems, and those systems are built over years around certain patterns, expectations, and unspoken rules. Everyone in the system learns how to play a role that keeps the environment stable. Some people become the peacemakers, some become the authority figures, some become the ones who avoid conflict, and sometimes one person becomes the one who asks questions that no one else wants to ask. When someone begins to grow in awareness, that role can shift dramatically. You may begin seeing patterns that once felt invisible. You may start recognizing behaviors that repeat across generations. You may question assumptions that everyone else has accepted as normal for years. And when that happens, the family system often reacts. Not because it consciously wants to harm you, but because any change inside a system can feel threatening to the balance it has maintained for so long. In many cases, the moment one person begins thinking differently, the entire emotional structure around them begins pushing back in subtle ways. This is why individuals who pursue personal growth, spiritual reflection, or deeper self-awareness sometimes experience the strongest resistance from the environments that shaped them. The family remembers the earlier version of you, the one who fit comfortably within the existing roles. When you begin stepping outside of that identity, it disrupts the expectations everyone unconsciously formed about who you are supposed to be. Suddenly, your new perspective feels unfamiliar to them, and unfamiliar things can trigger discomfort. Some relatives respond by minimizing your perspective. Others respond by criticizing it. Some may even attempt to pull you back into the old version of yourself, because that version feels predictable and safe. But God often works in a different way when someone begins evolving. Growth rarely happens without friction, and the places where we first learned how to live
are sometimes the same places where we encounter the strongest resistance when we try to grow beyond those early patterns. That resistance can feel deeply personal, especially when it comes from people whose acceptance once mattered the most. Yet in many situations, the conflict is not truly about you as a person. It is about the shift that your awareness represents. When one person in a system begins seeing life differently, the entire structure must either adapt or push back to preserve the familiar. This is why isolation inside a family can feel so confusing. You are not necessarily being rejected for who you are, but you may be encountering resistance because your growth is revealing differences that the system was never designed to handle easily. Understanding this dynamic changes the way you see the experience. Instead of assuming that something is wrong with you, you begin recognizing that awareness often separates people before it eventually leads them to healthier environments. In the journey ahead, we will explore the deeper reasons why family isolation happens and how someone can move forward without losing their identity, their peace, or their sense of purpose. Because feeling different inside your own family does not automatically mean you are broken. Sometimes, it simply means you are beginning to see life in a way that the environment around you has not yet learned to understand. As the experience of feeling isolated inside your own family begins to unfold, one of the first, deeper realizations that often appears is the simple but powerful awareness that you are seeing things other people seem determined not to notice. At first, this awareness does not feel like clarity. It feels more like confusion. You start observing certain behaviors that repeat themselves over and over again inside the family environment. Small arguments follow the same emotional script every time. The same topics trigger the same defensive reactions. Certain relatives play the same roles in every conflict, while others avoid confrontation completely. Over time, these patterns become impossible to ignore. You begin noticing how certain habits affect the emotional atmosphere of the household. Maybe someone constantly criticizes others, but refuses to reflect on their own behavior. Maybe certain family members carry unspoken resentment that quietly influences every conversation. Maybe there are long-standing wounds that everyone knows exist, but no one is willing to acknowledge openly. What makes this realization so difficult is that when you try to bring attention to these patterns, the response you receive is rarely understanding. Instead, the reaction often feels like rejection of the idea itself. Someone might immediately deny that the problem exists. Another person might accuse you of exaggerating the situation. Others might dismiss your observation entirely by saying you are overthinking things, or that you always focus on the negative side of life. The more clearly you explain what you see, the more resistance seems to appear. This experience can feel incredibly frustrating because from your perspective, you are simply pointing out something that already exists. You are not creating the problem, you are describing it. Yet, within the family system, the person who recognizes the pattern often becomes the one blamed for disturbing the peace. Over time, you begin realizing that families operate through a network of unspoken rules that everyone unconsciously follows. These rules are rarely discussed openly, but they shape how people behave with one another. One rule might be that certain topics should never be questioned. Another rule might be that a particular family member must always be respected, regardless of their behavior. Another rule might be that conflict should always be avoided, even if avoiding it allows problems to grow deeper beneath the surface. These invisible agreements help maintain stability inside the family system. They allow people to coexist without constantly confronting uncomfortable truths. But the moment someone begins to notice the patterns created by those rules, the system experiences tension. When you begin asking questions about things others have accepted for years, it disrupts the sense of normalcy that the system depends on. Suddenly, the conversation shifts from the behavior itself to the person who pointed it out. Instead of discussing the issue, people begin discussing you. They may say you are too sensitive, too critical, too analytical, or too dramatic. In some cases, they may accuse you of trying to create conflict where none existed before. Yet what they often fail to realize is that the conflict was already present. It simply remained hidden beneath routines and habits that everyone had learned not to question. From the deeper perspective, This moment is actually a sign of growing awareness. God sometimes opens a person's eyes to patterns that others cannot yet see because awareness is the first step toward transformation. When someone begins recognizing unhealthy cycles, it creates the possibility that those cycles might eventually change. But change rarely begins easily, especially inside environments where certain behaviors have existed for many years. People become emotionally invested in the roles they play. They build their identity around familiar dynamics, and when those dynamics are questioned, it can feel like their stability is being threatened. This is why the person who sees the pattern often becomes the one blamed for it.
The system protects itself by redirecting attention toward the messenger rather than the message. If the person who noticed the issue can be labeled as difficult or negative, then the system does not have to confront the deeper truth being revealed. For someone experiencing this dynamic, the emotional impact can be confusing. Part of you may begin doubting your own perception. You may ask yourself whether you are truly seeing things clearly or whether you are misinterpreting the situation. But with time, the patterns continue repeating themselves, and each repetition reinforces the realization that what you noticed was never imaginary. The cycle continues in the same way. The same reactions appear, and the same resistance emerges whenever the truth comes close to the surface. Eventually, you begin understanding that awareness can create a temporary sense of separation. When you see patterns that others are not ready to acknowledge, your perspective naturally moves outside the boundaries of the system that depends on ignoring them. This does not mean you are superior to the people around you, and it does not mean they are incapable of growth. It simply means you have reached a point of awareness that the environment has not yet reached collectively. And that realization can feel lonely at times, but it also carries a deeper purpose. Because the ability to recognize patterns is not just about understanding family dynamics. It is about developing the clarity required to break cycles that might otherwise continue for generations. When God allows someone to see what others prefer to ignore, it often means that person has the opportunity to respond differently. They are no longer trapped in the automatic reactions that shaped the past. Instead, they have the chance to choose a new direction. The awareness that once made them feel isolated can eventually become the very insight that allows them to build healthier relationships, create new environments, and move forward without repeating the same patterns that once defined the place they came from. As your awareness deepens and you begin recognizing the patterns that shape your family environment, another shift slowly begins to unfold inside you. The way you think starts to change. The habits you once accepted without question begin to lose their influence over you. You start reading different ideas, exploring personal growth, reflecting on your behavior, and asking deeper questions about the kind of life you want to live. Sometimes, this transformation begins through spiritual reflection, sometimes through difficult experiences that force you to grow, and sometimes through quiet moments where you realize that the person you were in the past is no longer the person you want to be. Growth rarely happens all at once. It usually begins with small decisions. You decide to respond differently during arguments instead of repeating the same reactions. You begin protecting your time and emotional energy instead of giving it away to situations that drain you. You start setting boundaries in conversations where you once remained silent. At first, these changes feel like personal improvements, simple adjustments that help you feel healthier and more balanced. But inside the family system, these changes can feel much larger than they appear. Families often develop an identity around who each person is supposed to be. Over many years, everyone unconsciously learns their role. One person becomes the caretaker, another becomes the authority figure, another becomes the one who always keeps the peace, and sometimes, one person becomes the one who carries blame whenever tension appears. These roles create a sense of predictability that allows the system to function without constant conflict. When you begin growing beyond the role that was assigned to you, the system reacts because the balance it depended on begins to shift. Relatives who once felt comfortable with the earlier version of you may begin responding in unexpected ways. Some may joke about your changes, treating your growth as something temporary or unrealistic. Others may criticize your new habits, suggesting that you are becoming too serious or too distant from the family. In some cases, people may even attempt to pull you back into the familiar role you used to play. They might remind you of how things have always been done, or they may insist that you are overcomplicating life by trying to change too much. From their perspective, the version of you they remember felt easier to understand. But growth often requires stepping outside of identities that no longer reflect who you are becoming. This moment can feel emotionally complicated because part of you still wants connection with the people who raised you. You do not necessarily want conflict or separation. At the same time, something inside you knows that returning to old patterns would mean abandoning the progress you have made. You may feel torn between the desire to maintain peace and the need to remain honest with your own development. Many chosen ones spend long periods navigating this internal tension. They try to explain their growth carefully, hoping their family will eventually understand. But understanding does not always arrive immediately. In many cases, people resist change, not because they want to hurt you, but because change forces them to reconsider their own habits and beliefs. When someone close to them begins evolving, it reflects the possibility that they might also need to evolve. That realization can feel uncomfortable, and discomfort often leads people to defend the familiar instead of exploring the new. This is why growth can sometimes separate people before it eventually elevates them. As your awareness expands, your priorities begin shifting naturally. Conversations that once felt normal may now feel unproductive. Behaviors that once seemed acceptable may now feel unhealthy. The emotional distance you feel inside the family may not come from rejection alone, but from the reality that you are gradually moving in a different direction. Over time, you start noticing that the way you spend your energy changes. Instead of participating in cycles that repeat endlessly, you begin investing your attention in learning, building skills, or developing a clearer sense of purpose. Your perspective on life becomes broader than the patterns that once defined your environment. And while this transformation may create temporary tension with the people around you, it also opens the door to a deeper form of independence. Independence in this context does not mean rejecting your family or believing you are superior to them. It means recognizing that your personal development cannot depend entirely on the comfort of others. Sometimes growth requires the courage to move forward, even when the people closest to you do not fully understand why you are changing. God often allows these moments to strengthen your sense of identity. When you choose growth despite resistance, you begin developing resilience that will serve you throughout your life. The opinions that once controlled your decisions lose some of their power. The fear of disappointing others slowly becomes less important than the responsibility to remain true to your own development. Eventually, you begin seeing the situation from a broader perspective. Your growth is not a personal attack on your family, and their discomfort does not necessarily mean they wish you harm. In many cases, both sides are simply responding to change in different ways. You are moving toward a new version of yourself, while the system around you is trying to maintain the version it has always known. Recognizing this dynamic can bring a sense of peace, even in the middle of tension, because once you understand that growth often disrupts familiar roles, you stop interpreting every negative reaction as proof that something is wrong with you. Instead, you begin recognizing that evolution always changes relationships, and sometimes the distance that appears during those changes is not the end of connection, but the beginning of a new chapter where your life begins to expand beyond the boundaries of the identity you once carried inside your family. As your awareness grows and your personal development begins reshaping the way you see the world, there comes a stage where the difference between you and the environment you grew up in becomes impossible to ignore. It is no longer just about noticing patterns or changing a few habits. The shift becomes deeper than that. Your priorities start changing, your values begin evolving, and the way you understand life slowly moves beyond the boundaries that once defined your family environment. This is often the moment when a person begins to feel like the different one inside their own household. The change does not always happen suddenly. In many cases, it develops gradually over time. You start caring about things that others in the family rarely discuss. You may become more focused on personal responsibility, emotional awareness, spiritual reflection, or long-term purpose. At the same time, certain topics that once dominated conversations begin to lose their importance to you. Arguments that revolve around blame or pride start feeling pointless. The need to prove yourself in every disagreement slowly fades. Instead, your attention moves toward understanding, growth, and building a life that reflects who you are becoming. From your perspective, these changes may feel natural. They represent progress, maturity, and a deeper awareness of the direction you want your life to take. But from the perspective of the family system, your transformation can feel unfamiliar. People who have known you for many years often carry a mental image of who you used to be. They remember your earlier personality, your earlier reactions, and the role you played in the family dynamic. When your mindset begins shifting beyond that role, it can create confusion. Some relatives may not know how to interpret the change. Others may react by attaching labels to the new version of you. They might describe you as too sensitive, too serious, or too independent. In some situations, they may suggest that you have become distant, or that you no longer value the family connection the way you once did. Hearing these labels can be painful, because you know the deeper truth behind your transformation.
You're not rejecting your family, and you're not trying to create distance intentionally. What is actually happening is that your awareness has reached a point where pretending to be the same person you used to be no longer feels possible. You have begun seeing life from a different perspective, and once that shift happens, it becomes extremely difficult to return to the old patterns that once felt normal. This stage often brings an internal struggle that many people find difficult to explain. Part of you still longs for the closeness and understanding that family relationships are supposed to provide. You remember moments from the past when connection felt easier and conversations felt lighter. At the same time, another part of you recognizes that maintaining that kind of connection might require ignoring the growth you have experienced. It might require pretending not to notice the patterns you now understand clearly. This tension creates a difficult choice. On one side is the desire for belonging, and on the other side is the need to remain honest with yourself. Many chosen ones reach a moment where they realize that pretending to fit in again would come at the cost of their authenticity. That realization marks a turning point in personal identity. For the first time, you begin defining yourself not by the expectations placed on you by others, but by the values and direction you feel guided toward internally. This moment can feel lonely because it often means accepting that not everyone in your family will understand the path you are choosing. Yet, it is also the moment when real independence begins to form. Instead of measuring your worth through approval from the environment you grew up in, you start learning how to trust your own perspective. You become more intentional about the way you spend your time and energy. Instead of reacting to every comment or criticism, you begin observing more carefully. You realize that protecting your emotional peace is not selfish. It is necessary for growth. This awareness slowly changes the way you interact with the family dynamic. You no longer feel the same need to defend every decision or explain every change in your life. Some conversations become shorter, some boundaries become clearer, and some expectations quietly lose their influence over your choices. What once felt like constant pressure to conform gradually becomes an opportunity to practice emotional discipline. Over time, you begin recognizing that becoming the different one is not always a negative experience. In many ways, it is the beginning of personal clarity. When you stop pretending to be someone you are not, you create space for a more authentic version of your life to emerge. The energy that once went into maintaining old roles becomes available for building new possibilities. You start investing more attention in the goals, relationships, and environments that align with your values,
rather than trying to preserve dynamics that no longer support your growth. From a spiritual perspective, many people eventually realize that this stage of life carries a deeper purpose. God sometimes allows a person to feel different within familiar environments, so they can develop the courage to follow their own path. If every step of growth were immediately supported by everyone around you, it might be easy to remain dependent on their approval. But when understanding is limited, you are forced to build confidence in your own direction. The moment you stop pretending to fit into an identity that no longer reflects who you are becoming is the moment your real life begins taking shape. It is the moment when your decisions start coming from conviction rather than pressure. And although that journey may begin with a sense of separation, it often leads to a future where you can build relationships and environments that resonate with the person you have truly become. After recognizing the patterns, the resistance, and the feeling of becoming the different one inside your own family, the most important question naturally appears. What do you do next? Feeling isolated in your family can create deep emotional confusion because family is supposed to represent safety, belonging, and understanding. When those things are missing, many people spend years trying to force a connection that no longer functions in a healthy way. They keep explaining themselves, keep trying to gain approval, and keep hoping that if they say the right words, everything will finally make sense to everyone else. But growth eventually teaches a different lesson. The way forward is not about forcing understanding. The way forward is about learning how to continue your life without losing your peace in the process. One of the first steps is accepting a simple but difficult truth. Not everyone in your family will fully understand who you are becoming. This realization can feel painful at first because most people grow up believing that family members will naturally support their development. Yet, human relationships are shaped by many factors, including personal experiences, emotional maturity, and individual beliefs about life. Sometimes, the gap between your perspective and theirs becomes too wide for immediate understanding. Accepting this difference does not mean you stop loving your family or that you completely disconnect from them. It simply means you stop expecting them to validate every decision you make. Peace often begins the moment you release the pressure of trying to prove yourself. When you stop chasing constant validation, your emotional energy becomes available for building your own direction. Another essential step involves creating healthy emotional boundaries. Boundaries are often misunderstood because many people think they are a form of rejection or distance. In reality, boundaries are simply a way of protecting your mental and emotional space so that growth can continue without constant disruption. In a family environment, boundaries might mean choosing not to engage in certain arguments that repeat without resolution. It might mean limiting conversations that consistently turn into criticism or misunderstanding. It might also mean protecting your time so that your personal goals and responsibilities are not constantly interrupted by expectations that no longer align with your life. Setting boundaries does not require anger or confrontation. In many situations, the most effective boundaries are quiet and consistent. You gradually stop participating in dynamics that drain your energy and begin directing that energy toward things that help you grow. Over time, people around you often adjust to the new pattern because they realize your priorities have changed. Another powerful step in moving forward is building support outside the family system. While family can play an important role in a person's life, it is not the only source of meaningful connection. Many people discover that mentorship, friendships, and communities aligned with their values can provide the understanding that was missing in their original environment. These connections do not replace your family, but they expand your support system. Being surrounded by people who encourage growth can change the way you see your own potential. When you interact with individuals who value honesty, self-development, and purpose, you begin realizing that your perspective is not as unusual as you once believed. Instead, you discover that many people around the world are walking similar paths of awareness and transformation. Perhaps the most important step of all is focusing on building your own life.
Isolation within the family often creates a period of reflection, where you begin questioning what kind of future you truly want to create. Instead of spending years trying to repair dynamics that may never fully change, you can invest that time in developing your abilities, pursuing meaningful work, and creating independence. Every skill you build, every goal you pursue, and every healthy relationship you cultivate becomes part of a life that reflects your true direction. What once felt like rejection can gradually transform into preparation. Many people eventually realize that the season of isolation was not meant to destroy their confidence, but to strengthen their independence. From a spiritual perspective, some believe that God allows certain forms of separation so a person can grow without being limited by the expectations of their past environment. When you are no longer confined by the roles others assign to you, your identity becomes clearer. You start living based on purpose rather than pressure. Sometimes distance is not rejection at all. Sometimes it is protection for your future, allowing you to grow into the person you are meant to become while still holding respect for where you came from. If you have ever felt like the outsider in your own family, remember this: isolation does not automatically mean something is wrong with you. Sometimes it means you are seeing life from a level of awareness that others around you are not ready to explore yet. History often creates distance before it creates clarity, and many people who eventually build meaningful, purposeful lives first pass through a season where they feel misunderstood by the environments that raised them. What matters is not forcing everyone to understand your journey, but continuing to move forward with integrity, patience, and faith in the direction God is guiding you. Your path may look different from the one your family expected, but that does not make it less valid. In many cases, it simply means you are evolving beyond patterns that were never meant to define your future. If this message resonates with your experience, comment "growth" below and share one lesson you learned from feeling different in your family.